program is supported by SMC Global Power.
Hello, I'm Alma Angeles and you're watching Eagle News International. On tonight's headlines. The Department of Foreign Affairs said 3 Chinese Coast Guard vessels fired off a water cannon on 2 Philippine ships to stop them from going to Ayungin Shoal in the West Philippine Sea. Canada is sending the military to help evacuate and support communities hit by catastrophic flooding, with the death toll expected to rise after record rainfall on the Pacific coast triggered a state of emergency. U.S. actor Alec Baldwin chose to play Russian roulette with safety in the minutes leading up to the fatal movie set shooting of a cinematographer, a new lawsuit alleged on Wednesday. And South Korea's new coronavirus cases hit an all-time high since the start of the pandemic amid eased social distancing rules, putting health authorities on alert over further upticks. First in our news, the Department of Foreign Affairs said 3 Chinese Coast Guard vessels fired off a water cannon on 2 Philippine ships to stop them from going to Ayungin Shoal in the West Philippine Sea. Take a look. DFA Secretary Teodoro Locsin Jr. said he protested in the strongest term this incident to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Beijing, and even reminded China that the attacked Philippine ship is a public vessel and covered by the Philippine-U.S. Defense Treaty. In a statement, Locsin said the DFA received a report from the AFP Western Command that 2 Philippine supply ships doing routine transport of food supplies to Filipino soldiers were blocked and water cannoned while on their way to Ayungin Shoal, or the Second Thomas Shoal, located 194 kilometers west of Palawan. Fortunately, no one was hurt, but our boats had to abort their resupply mission, according to Locsin. He said, I have conveyed in the strongest terms to His Excellency Wang Shilian, Ambassador of China, and to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Beijing, our outrage, condemnation, and protest of the incident, according to the top diplomat. Locsin also asserted that the Philippines has sovereignty and jurisdiction over Ayungin Shoal as it's part of the Philippine territory, being an integral part of the Kalayaan Island Group, and has maritime sovereign rights as it's also part of its exclusive economic zone and continental shelf. The acts of the Chinese Coast Guard vessels are illegal. China has no law enforcement rights in and around these areas, and they must take heed and back off. He also reminded China that a public vessel is covered by the Philippine-United States Mutual Defense Treaty. Under the MDT, or the treaty, U.S. is under treaty obligation to help the Philippines in case of an attack by a foreign aggressor within the Philippine territory, in the Pacific area, or on any Philippine public vessel. This is the first time that the Philippines publicly mentioned the MDT over an incident in the West Philippine Sea. Taiwan held a ceremony today to commission the first squadron of its most advanced F-16 fighter, a U.S.-made jet that will strengthen the island's defenses against threat by China. President Tsai Ing-wen oversaw the ceremony at an airbase in the southern city of Chiayi alongside Sandra Udkirk, Washington's de facto ambassador to Taiwan. Take a look.
这是台美双方的国防工业合作，不仅是台美友谊的再进展，更代表台美伙伴关系的坚定承诺。我相信，只要坚守民主自由的价值，一定会有更多理念相近的国家跟我们站在同一个阵线。
The F-16V is an upgraded and much more sophisticated version of Taiwan's other aging F-16 fighters, which date back to the 1990s. The island also has French-made Mirage jets and its own indigenous warplane. A fourth-generation multi-role fighter, the F-16V boasts more advanced radar systems as well as more sophisticated weaponry, navigation, and electronic warfare systems. The deployment of the first squadron comes at a time of soaring tensions between Beijing and Washington over Taiwan's fate. The self-ruled democracy of 23 million is claimed by Beijing, which has vowed to one day take the island by force if needed be. In the last decade, China has built up its military to the point where Taiwanese and U.S. military officials have publicly voiced fears it could soon pull off an invasion. Washington diplomatically recognizes Beijing over Taiwan, but it opposes any attempt to change Taiwan's status by force and is bound by an act of Congress to help the island maintain its own defenses. In other news, a long-standing territorial dispute between South Korea and Japan derailed a trilateral press conference in Washington, laying bare the strained relationship between the key U.S. allies. U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman faced the press alone following talks on Wednesday after Japan protested a recent visit by South Korea's police chief to islets administered by Seoul but claimed by Tokyo. Take a look.
As has been the case for some time, there are some bilateral differences between Japan and the Republic of Korea that are continuing to be resolved. And one of those differences, which is unrelated to today's meeting, has led to the change in format for today's press availability.
Japan said it objected to the conference because South Korea's national police chief visited the disputed islets, which are called Dokdo by Seoul and Takeshima by Tokyo. A Japanese embassy spokesman in Washington said the islets are indisputably an inherent part of the territory of Japan and that Tokyo had lodged a protest with Seoul over the visit. South Korean Vice Foreign Minister Choi Jong-kun confirmed that his Japanese counterpart, Takeo Mori, did not attend the press conference over the issues surrounding the police chief's visit to Dokdo. Tokyo and Seoul have had strained relationships for decades due to Japan's brutal colonial rule over the Korean peninsula between 1910 and 1945. Flare-ups are a source of concern for Washington, which fears tensions between its two closest Asian allies could have repercussions for regional security. In other news, the chairman of the WTA, which governs women's tennis, expressed his growing concerns Wednesday for Chinese star Peng Shuai after a letter purportedly from the player appeared on state media. Take a look. The statement released today by Chinese state media concerning Peng Shuai only raises my concerns as to her safety and whereabouts. That is according to WTA chief Steve Semen wrote in a statement. I have had a hard time believing that Peng Shuai actually wrote the email we received or believes what is being attributed to her, he added. State-run CGTN published an email Wednesday attributed to Peng, which the player allegedly sent to WTA officials. Peng, a former Wimbledon and French Open doubles champion, has not been heard from since, alleging 2 weeks ago that a powerful Chinese politician sexually assaulted her. Peng, 35, alleged on the Twitter-like Weibo earlier this month that former Vice Premier Zhang Gaoli had forced her into sex during a long-term on and off relationship. Peng Shuai displayed incredible courage in describing an allegation of sexual assault against a former top official in the Chinese government, according to Simon. He called for independent and verifiable proof that she is safe. Details of Peng's reported accusations remain scrubbed from China's internet. The post appeared to have been deleted quickly, and AFP was unable to verify the authenticity of the screenshots containing the allegation or substantiate the claims made in them. Four-time Grand Slam champion Naomi Osaka also said that she was in shock about Peng, with Novak Djokovic and numerous other players in recent days saying they were deeply worried about her. In other news, U.S. actor Alec Baldwin chose to play Russian roulette with safety in the minutes leading up to the fatal movie set shooting of a cinematographer, a new lawsuit alleged today. Script supervisor Mamie Mitchell, who made an emotional 911 call moments after the incident, is accusing Baldwin and his fellow producers of assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and deliberate infliction of harm. Take a look.
In our opinion, Mr. Baldwin chose to play Russian roulette when he fired a gun without checking it and without having the armorer do so in his presence. His behavior and that of the producers on Rust was reckless. We allege in our lawsuit that the events that led to the shooting by Mr. Baldwin of a loaded gun do not constitute simple negligence on Alec Baldwin's part or the producers of Rust.
I'll never forget what happened on the set of Rust that day. I relived the shooting and the sound of the explosion from the gun over and over again. I'm depressed. I don't feel safe. I feel like at any moment anything could happen to me and to those that I care about that are standing close to me. I'm frightened of the future. This violent tragedy has taken away the joy in my life.
The suit is the second to be filed in a week over the killing of Helena Hutchins during rehearsals for low-budget Western Rust in New Mexico last month. Armorer Hannah Gutierrez-Reed and Assistant Director Dave Halls are also named in the suit. Cinematographer Hutchins, 42, was shot and killed as Baldwin rehearsed a scene in which he fires a gun at the camera. The Emmy winner was handed the firearm by Halls, who declared it code industry lingo for an inert weapon. Halls later told investigators he had not fully checked it. The live bullet passed through Hutchins and hit director Joel Souza in the shoulder. Last week, Chief Lighting Technician Serge Svetnoy also sued Baldwin and others, alleging negligence. Experts say a rash of civil legal action is expected in connection with the tragedy. Canada is sending the military to help evacuate and support communities hit by catastrophic flooding, with the death toll expected to rise after record rainfall on the Pacific coast triggered a state of emergency. Take a look.
Abbotsford, late last night, we issued an urgent plea to anyone in the Sumas Prairie to leave immediately. 184 individuals who could not evacuate safely were supported by water and air rescue last night. Our team continues to evacuate individuals as needed. So my prayer has been that the river will drop another meter or more. Let us open up those floodgates. That will buy us some more time.
We were incredibly busy and active all morning throughout the night, evacuating people. As you heard, we had over 120 calls in the queue for people waiting to be evacuated. Many people were able to self-evacuate, which was outstanding. And we're encouraging people, if it is safe to do so, please leave the area.
Just the worst flooding that I've ever seen. I come from an area built of floodplains in a city built in the middle of it. But, you know, this is quite significant here. It affects a lot of people, and it's really disheartening to see it. So it's been pretty concerning. The water on the other side of the freeway was right up to the highway. It doesn't go any farther than that. Fortunately, it's drained down a little bit now. The thought of those pumps quitting would be very detrimental. Everybody's pretty concerned around here. My daughter called me, was in tears, wanted us to leave, worried about the area. So far, we seem like we're okay, but we're right at the edge of it. But it's pretty bad for a lot of people out there. It's not good.
This area here was absolutely chaotic yesterday. Absolutely everything was underwater. The street was flooded out. There was motor. It was just completely unreal.
It's a lot of people affected. I feel particularly sorry for our farmers around this area. We have large dairy farms, and these people are being told that they have to evacuate. They have cattle that they can't just leave. We had one friend that we checked on today is down on the farm. He's staying on a He has a small farm, sheep and that sort of thing, but he's staying in the barn for the night. The rest of his family's gone, but he doesn't want to leave the animals. The rest of us, I mean, I've got one daughter and her family are holed up in Princeton and they're trying to get back to White Rock. I have another one staying with mother-in-law somewhere else in Abbotsford, and it goes on and on. But everybody seems to be doing whatever they can to help each other.
Meanwhile, British Columbia Premier John Horgan declared a state of emergency and imposed a travel ban, telling reporters catastrophic rains, winds, and flooding have devastated entire communities of the province. By Tuesday afternoon, the torrential rains had let up. An estimated 300 motorists trapped on highways by mudslides have been airlifted to safety, and a few evacuation orders have been rescinded. But Henry Braun, mayor of hard-hit Abbotsford, east of Vancouver, told a briefing that we're not out of this yet. Meanwhile, searches continue for more possible victims after a woman's body was recovered from a mudslide near Lillooet, 250 kilometers northeast of Vancouver. And motorist Kathy Rennie told public broadcaster CBC she witnessed the whole side of the mountain coming down and taking out these cars, everything just being swept away, and just complete panic. As the season's first snow flurry started falling over inland towns covered in mud and partially inundated, residents scrambled for food, heat, and water. Many grocery store shelves were empty as supply chain disruptions led to panic buying. Environment Canada said up to 250 millimeters, almost 10 inches of rain, what the region normally gets in a month, fell on Sunday and Monday in and around Vancouver, which was also hit last week by a rare tornado. Meteorologists blamed an atmospheric river or narrow strip of moisture carried from tropical regions toward the poles for the deluge. Meanwhile, Egyptians are checking the damage of their homes after unprecedented bad weather hit the southern Egyptian city of Aswan, situated along the Nile River, which killed 4, injured dozens, and flushed out scorpions with a deadly sting. Take a look.
ده تحتيه حاجات ده سريري وحاجتي وتكييفي وكل حاجتي كل حاجة هنا تحت التراب ده ثلاجتك وين؟
According to the Smithsonian magazine, sudden floods from a rare storm in Egypt have flushed swarms of scorpions from their underground burrows into people's homes. In addition to forcing the arachnids into close contact with people, the heavy rainfall and hail damaged buildings, toppled trees, destroyed roads, and cut off electricity. In a single night, the venomous 4-inch long scorpion stung more than 500 locals. And Egypt's Ministry of Health says they have a large reserve of anti-venom, noting that more than 3,000 doses were available in Aswan. That was according to Al Jazeera. Meanwhile, Delhi residents are reacting as winter pollution levels remain dangerously high, with authorities canceling school classes and urging people to work from home. Take a look.
I think day by day, the thing is getting more and more severe and worse. Now, I'm a patient of asthma as well, apart from diabetes. And I find it so difficult to breathe living in Delhi. Sometimes I feel that I should leave the city. But then, where should I go? You know, it's not a problem that can be solved just within a few days or maybe few months. But some drastic step has to be taken to combat this air pollution.
People were finding solution to corona, and now we have the jabs and all that. I don't know where the solution will come for this pollution, which is killing. We have become a chamber, gas chamber, toxic. I don't know where the solution and when the solution will come.
India's capital has shut schools and coal plants as it battles dangerous levels of air pollution in the region. That on Wednesday also left Lahore in neighboring Pakistan choking on acrid smog. Air quality has worsened across northern India and adjacent parts of Pakistan in recent years as industrial pollutants, smoke from seasonal crop burn-off, and colder winter temperatures coalesce into toxic smog. The city on Tuesday ordered the closure until the end of the month of 6 of 11 coal-fired power plants surrounding the metropolis in a bid to tackle the filthy air. In other news, a 50-year-old man convicted of murdering his estranged wife and sexually assaulting his stepdaughter was executed on Wednesday in the southern U.S. state of Mississippi, according to local media. David Cox, a former truck driver, was put to death by lethal injection at the Mississippi State Penitentiary in Parchman. He said, "I want my children to know that I love them very much and that I was a good man at one time," Cox said in his last words, according to State Department of Corrections Commissioner Burl Cain. The Clarion Ledger newspaper reported, "Don't ever read anything but the King James Bible. I want to thank the commissioner for being so very kind to me, and that's all I got to say," Cox reportedly said. In 2009, Cox's wife, Kim, told police that Cox had sexually assaulted her daughter from a previous relationship. Cox also spent months in prison before being released on bond. After his release, he bought a handgun and broke into a home where Kim Cox was staying with their 2 young sons and her daughter. After shooting his estranged wife, Cox sexually assaulted his then 12-year-old stepdaughter in front of her dying mother. Cox was sentenced to death in 2012 after pleading guilty to murder, sexual assault, and other charges. And the Mississippi Supreme Court agreed with evaluations that Cox was mentally competent and a date was set for his execution. Kim Cox's daughter told the Daily Journal newspaper that she intended to attend the execution. Now, he was the 10th person executed in the U.S. this year and the first since 2012 in Mississippi. In other news, the Philippine Overseas Employment Administration, or POEA, has imposed a total deployment ban of Filipino workers to Ethiopia in the wake of the continuing conflict between the government and insurgents. In Governing Board Resolution number 12, series of 2021, signed by POEA, Governing Board Chairman and Department of Labor and Employment, or DOLE Secretary Silvestre Abelio III, also ordered concerned government agencies to come up with a plan on the immediate repatriation of Filipinos there. On November 8, the DFA has informed the DOLE that it has raised the crisis alert level in Ethiopia to alert level 4, meaning evacuation, mandatory repatriation, in view of the escalating conflict between the Tigray People's Liberation Front and the Ethiopian government. According to the United Nations, the conflict has left thousands dead and pushed about 400,000 people into famine-like conditions. Under Alert Level 4, a total ban on the processing and deployment of all workers is imposed, and mandatory repatriation of OFWs shall be required and undertaken. The Philippine Embassy in Cairo, Egypt, will coordinate with Filipinos in Ethiopia on their repatriation. Meanwhile, the United States and Kenya on Wednesday pressed for a ceasefire in Ethiopia, holding out hope for a negotiated solution between the government and rebels as diplomacy intensifies over the year-long war. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, on a 3-nation tour of Africa that will take him to Nigeria and Senegal, also sounded a warning about a global retreat in democracy as he encouraged close ally Kenya to ensure free elections next year. Let's listen in.
One place where we're both deeply concerned is Ethiopia. The conflict there threatens not just that country, but its neighbors as well. I very much appreciate President Kenyatta's engagement on this, including at the United Nations and in person in Ethiopia. We're working closely with Kenya, the African Union, and its High Representative for the Horn of Africa, former Nigerian President Obasanjo, as well as other partners.
Neighbor, we believe in the potential of Ethiopia to find a resolution to this crisis. We believe that a ceasefire is possible. We believe that the other conditions regarding humanitarian access are possible. We must believe in the fortitude and the wisdom of the Ethiopian people, because in the end, these solutions will come from them.
Meanwhile, street clashes again shook Sudan's capital Thursday, a day after security forces shot dead 15 protesters in the bloodiest day since the military's October 25 takeover. Take a look.
طلعنا الليلة نصرة للثورة وللإعادة المدنية لأن هذا انقلاب كامل الدسم والآن بدأ قطع النت والاتصالات.
Top General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, Sudan's de facto leader since the April 2019 ouster of longtime President Omar al-Bashir, detained the civilian leadership and declared a state of emergency on October 25. The move upended Sudan's fragile transition to full civilian rule, drawing international condemnation and a flurry of punitive measures and aid cuts. Al-Burhan, Sudan's de facto leader, insisted the military's move was not a coup, but a step to rectify the course of the transition to civilian rule. The latest demonstrations were organized despite a near-total shutdown of internet services and the disruption of telephone lines across Sudan. By Thursday morning, phone lines had been restored, but internet services remained largely cut. In other news, the Polish army today said it had detained a group of about 100 migrants who crossed the Belarus border during the night, accusing Belarusian forces of leading the operation. Video footage released by the Defense Ministry appeared to show Polish soldiers surrounding a large group of migrants crouched down in a wooded area at night next to some barbed wire. The incident came as Belarus, which has said it wants to defuse the crisis, prepared a first repatriation flight for migrants to Iraq that will have between 200 and 300 people on board. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, who has ruled with an iron fist for nearly 3 decades, has spoken to German Chancellor Angela Merkel on the crisis twice in recent days. Lukashenko's press service on Wednesday said the Belarus leader and Merkel agreed that the problem as a whole will be brought up to the level of Belarus and the EU. AIDS groups say at least 11 migrants have died since the crisis began in the summer. In a sign that the crisis is becoming entrenched, the Belarusian authorities put up some 1,000 migrants in a logistical center this week, a move that could make the camp a semi-permanent presence on the borders of the EU. The EU accuses Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko of engineering the crisis to force the Europeans to restart dialogue, which the West cut off after his regime launched a crackdown on the opposition in the wake of a presidential election last year. And as winter approaches, freezing conditions will only make life more difficult for the migrants outside, whose current choices are limited: stay in Belarus and hope Europe reconsiders, or return home. And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back. Welcome back. The city government of Manila will administer booster shots for its medical frontliners and healthcare workers starting on Friday. In a statement today, Vice Mayor Hani Lacuna Peng said the city government has enough supply of the coronavirus vaccines, including booster shots for the healthcare workers. The city government is ready and prepared for the administration of the COVID-19 booster shots, she added. According to the Manila Health Department, the administration of booster shots will be done in city's 6 district hospitals. This will include the Hospital ng Maynila, Hospital ng Sampaloc, Justice Jose Abad Santos General Hospital, Gat Andres Bonifacio Medical Center, Hospital ng Tondo, and Santa Ana Hospital. South Korea's new coronavirus cases hit an all-time high today since the start of the pandemic amid eased social distancing rules, putting health authorities on alert over further upticks. According to Yonhap News Agency, the country reported a record high of 3,292 new daily cases, including 3,272 local infections, raising the total caseload to 406,065, according to the Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency. Thursday's daily caseload marks the highest since the country reported its first COVID case in January last year and exceeds the previous record of 3,270 reported on September 25. The surge in daily cases came after the country began easing antivirus restrictions for a gradual return to pre-pandemic life under the Living with COVID-19 scheme earlier this month. Daily cases have stayed in the quadruple digits since July 7 amid growing cluster infections. Meanwhile, Ontario saw a rise in COVID cases, or is seeing a rise in COVID cases in schools since the start of the school year. Here's Josh Santillana from our EBC Canada Bureau.
As full-time in-person classes for public and private schools continue, Ontario is seeing a high surge of school-related COVID-19 cases. This week, Ontario's case numbers within schools was reported to have reached over 1,000 active cases, the highest it has been in weeks. Prior to the beginning of the school year, Ontario released health and safety protocols to be followed in schools for the 2021-2022 school year. Although remote learning continues to be an option for students and families, a large number of Ontario students are enrolled in in-person learning. However, as of November 15, only approximate 80% of 12 to 17-year-olds in Ontario are fully vaccinated. This is in addition to those 11-year-olds and younger who remain ineligible for vaccination. However, Canada remains expectant to hear approval for the new Pfizer-BioNTech Comirnaty vaccine for 5 to 11-year-olds soon. On October 18, Pfizer submitted an application to Health Canada regarding the approval for the pediatric vaccine, and after authorization, Canada can expect about 2.9 million doses delivered. As of November 15, there are a total of 4,985 active cases in Ontario. Of those nearly 5,000 cases, 1,006 active cases are reported to have come from Ontario schools. In Toronto, Joshua Santillana, Eagle News. We live in interesting times.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel called the COVID-19 situation in Germany dramatic in a speech to an organization of representatives of German cities. Take a look.
Wir müssen leider konstatieren, auch wenn es in diesem Jahr anders ist, dass die Pandemie alles andere als vorbei ist. Im Gegenteil, die gegenwärtige Pandemielage in Deutschland ist dramatisch. Ich kann es nicht anders sagen. Die 4. Welle trifft unser Land mit voller Wucht.
A fourth ferocious wave has sent infections to record highs in Europe's biggest economy, putting hospitals in parts of the country under immense strain and forcing some to look elsewhere in the EU for help. While the absolute number of patients in intensive care still lies below the peak a year ago, this time around, hospitals are also ailing from the double whammy of a shortfall in personnel that has seriously hampered their ability to cope. Chancellor Angela Merkel made a new plea on Wednesday for the unvaccinated to get jabbed, saying when enough people are vaccinated, that is the way out of the pandemic. In a bid to get more to take the jab, Germany's parliament is poised to vote through new regulations for more curbs on the unvaccinated. Under proposals drafted by the three parties in talks to form Germany's new government, unvaccinated people will soon have to produce a negative test to use public transport or go to the office. Belgium Prime Minister Alexander De Croo announced that it will be compulsory to wear masks in public and that those who can work from home should do so at least 4 days a week from Monday. According to a report from Bloomberg, the Prime Minister on Wednesday also said the government will mandate indoor mask wearing, even in venues where access is regulated by a COVID vaccination pass. Belgium's government and regions resisted calls from experts to shut down its nightlife. The tightening reflects how Belgium's relatively high vaccination rate is not by itself protecting the country from being overrun by the broader resurgence of the COVID pandemic across Europe. The average number of daily cases in the country now tops 10,000, and Belgium has one of the highest per capita case rates in Western Europe. Meanwhile, Ireland said Tuesday it was asking people to work from home again while expanding its COVID vaccination booster program and certification scheme as case rates and hospitalizations rise nationwide. In a televised broadcast, the Prime Minister Michael Martin said it was increasingly clear the country was experiencing another surge of COVID infection and that he needed to act now. Martin noted Ireland's COVID passes scheme, based on vaccination or recovery from the virus, would now legally include cinemas and theaters, while bars and pubs would now be required to be closed by midnight. He also said vaccine boosters would be extended to everyone with an underlying condition and everyone over the age of 50. The last week has seen the second highest rate of hospital admissions from coronavirus this year, according to Martin. That is despite Ireland having one of the highest vaccination rates in the world, with around 90% of over 12s fully jabbed. The country only fully reopened on October 22 after 18 months of rolling lockdowns introduced to limit infections. Back here in the country, the Department of National Defense Secretary Delfin Lorenzana on Wednesday night confirmed that he tested positive again for COVID-19. Hello, everyone, he said. Yes, I am COVID-19 positive, and this morning I got the result of my swab test. Tuesday afternoon, after the Senate hearing, I am asymptomatic. He said in a message when asked to confirm reports that he is positive again for the sickness. This is the second time for this year that Lorenzana tested positive for COVID-19. Last April, he went on quarantine to avoid infecting others in the DND after being positive for the disease. In 2020, the DND chief tested negative for COVID-19 in March and April after coming into close contact with people infected with the virus. Lorenzana added that he is fully vaccinated, and he said he'll observe himself for several days and then have another swab test. Lorenzana has just returned home from making official trips to Spain and Poland last week. Pharmaceutical giant Novavax has applied for authorization for their coronavirus vaccine in the EU, with a decision possible within weeks. That's according to the Europe's drugs regulator. The jab, if approved, would be the 5th authorized for use within the EU. The other 4 are made by Pfizer, BioNTech, AstraZeneca, Oxford, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson. The assessment of the vaccine, which goes under the brand name Nuvaxovid, would be carried out under an accelerated timeline, according to the European Medicines Agency. Working differently to other vaccines, Nuvaxovid contains tiny particles made from a version of a protein found on the surface of the coronavirus spike protein, made in a laboratory. It also contains a substance to help strengthen the immune response to the vaccine. The EMA said when a person is given the vaccine, their immune system will identify the protein particles as foreign and produce natural defenses, antibodies and T cells against them. If a vaccinated person later came into contact with the coronavirus, the immune system will recognize the spike protein on the virus and be prepared to attack it. The antibodies and immune cells can protect against COVID-19 by working together to kill the virus, prevent its entry into the body cells, and destroy infected cells. The vaccination regimen calls for 2 0.5 milliliter jabs given intramuscularly 21 days apart, according to Novavax in a statement. Nuvaxovid is stored between 2 to 8 degrees Celsius, enabling the use of existing vaccine supply and cold chain channels, it added. Novavax, a company based in the U.S. state of Maryland, says its vaccine has 90% efficacy against COVID-19 based on a North American study. Hard hit by the pandemic, Indonesia became the first country to approve the Novavax vaccine in the beginning of November, according to the company. And on Wednesday, Novavax said it also received approval from the Philippines to use the vaccine under the brand name Covovax. And back here in the country, local vaccination drives may now use COVID-19 vaccine of Novavax after it was finally granted an emergency use authorization by the FDA on Wednesday. Now, FDA Director General Eric Domingo announced they issued the EUA after Novavax passed their screening process. It's approved for the active immunization of individuals 18 years and above for the prevention of COVID-19, Domingo said in a televised interview with PTV. He also noted the Novavax vaccine will be given in 2 doses, at least 3 weeks to 4 weeks apart. Citing the results of the clinical trial, he said Novavax causes mild adverse events and it has an efficacy rate of 89.7%. He also said we could probably start using the vaccine towards the end of the year or by 2022. The news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng mga hamon ng buhay, nandito kami para umalalay. Kasi katulad mo, gusto rin namin ang magandang bukas para sa kanya. Hatid namin ang dekalidad na edukasyon at makabagong pasilidad sa abot kayang halaga. Kaya huwag ka na mangamba, sasamahan ka namin tuparin ang mga pangarap niya. Maaasahan mong sulit dito ang mga pinagsikapan mo. Sa aming mga makabagong pasilidad at sistema ng edukasyon. Mailalabas natin ang aking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa New Era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. Kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
Welcome back. The boss of Asia-focused lending giant HSBC backed Hong Kong's decision to mirror China's zero-COVID strategy on Thursday, despite rising concern within the finance industry over the business hub's international isolation. Hong Kong has maintained some of the world's harshest quarantine measures and travel restrictions during the pandemic. The strategy has kept infections low but ensured a business hub that dubs itself Asia's world city has been cut off internationally for the past 20 months. The government has tied the city's fortunes to China's strict coronavirus strategy and said normalization of travel with the mainland must come before any reopening to the rest of the world. HSBC CEO Noel Quinn said he supported that approach. Quinn's comments contrast with growing alarm voiced by international businesses in Hong Kong over how they are struggling to retain and recruit talent as rival finance centers reopen. In other business news, e-commerce leader Alibaba Group said on Thursday that its profit for the most recent quarter tumbled 81% as a government crackdown on the country's big tech champions bit into its bottom line. Alibaba said its profit came in at 5.37 billion yuan or $833 million for the July to September period, falling from 28.77 billion yuan earned over the same stretch last year. Alibaba's earnings results have been keenly anticipated for a gauge of how one of the country's highest profile companies was faring under the government's drive to rein in big tech. China's ruling Communist Party had previously relied upon its tech giants to push forward digital transformation in the country. But it abruptly turned on the sector late last year as concerns mounted over its aggressive expansion, alleged monopolistic practices, and data security, paralleling similar unease with tech firms in the U.S. and elsewhere. And since then, the government has taken a number of other measures against major Chinese digital players, sending their share prices also tumbling. Monetary authorities kept the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas key policy rate steady on Thursday after noting the need for sustained policy support for the economy as it continues its recovery. Today, the BSP's overnight reverse repurchase rate, or RRP, remains at a record low 2%. The overnight lending rate is at 2.5% and the overnight deposit rate is at 1.5%. In a briefing streamed through its Facebook page, BSP Governor Benjamin Diokno said the central bank's policy-making monetary board has cited the solid growth traction of the economy due in part to the continued easing of mobility restrictions, which improves sentiments and the gains in the government's vaccination program. He, however, said risks of delays in the lifting of movement restrictions and the emergence of more virulent coronavirus disease variants dampen prospects for growth in both the domestic and global economy. Diokno said risks to the continued recovery of the economy lessen inflationary pressures. And finally in our news, breath-sniffing sensors and finger-scanning detectors are central to a landmark U.S. safety mandate to fight drunk driving that is spurring tough questions about what technology can be trusted to do. The federal law, which will require new cars to spot intoxicated drivers in coming years, could save thousands of lives annually with the potential to expand abroad. Take a look.
This technology would prevent anyone who has been drinking and is over the legal limit from either starting or moving their car. And the safety benefits, therefore, are huge. I mean, the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety predicts roughly 9,400 deaths annually would be avoided with this technology. Bottom line is, if for some reason there is a crash or whatever that captures the data, if it's retrievable from the vehicle, you're going to need the owner's permission to get access to that vehicle. And then you're going to need special tools to be able to extract or retrieve that data from the vehicle. Our focus is to develop technology that performs very well over the life of the vehicle and that is accepted by consumers. Because if it's not accepted by consumers, it's going nowhere. And I say that because we have prior experience with seatbelt interlocks from the 1970s that were roundly rejected by consumers, and then they were actually outlawed.
And with that, we end tonight's program. Thank you for joining us. And as I always say, at the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. We'll see you back tomorrow. I'm Alma Angeles, and we live in interesting times.
This program is supported by SMC Global Power,